Very good morning to all of you. I welcome and I thank each and every one of you who has taken part in this session, in particular to one of the doctors who have mentioned about the discrimination of the elderly people and of the racism that has been going on throughout our country, and mainly to some of the doctors who have also mentioned about the acceptance of the women participation in the political background. That has been really grateful, and that has been really great, and has really been a very success motive on your side, ma'am. I would now like to call upon Dr. Leeson Varghese, who is also a national learner and a conscientious teacher who believes a selfless approach for the overall development of the entire humanity. He has also taken roles of the principal, of the academic dean and the IQAC coordinator, research supervisor, and the academic council member. He has also been the head of the department of the various backgrounds. He has also served as the resource person for several national and international conferences and journals. I welcome you, sir. I would hand over the session to you. And before I proceed this, I would also request the presenters to kindly limit your presentations, as the time limit would be 10 minutes only. And I would also request the audiences to please put on your questions in a chat box. We will be handling the questions to our chairperson or to any of the resource person to answer to your queries once the session is done. Thank you so much. I have with me the list of the presenters, sir. Number one is Dr. Anita Sharma, who is also the Associate Department of English from the Government College of the Dhami Shimla, Himachal Pradesh of India, and also Rita Sharma, who is the Assistant Professor of the Department of English from the Government College, Thiog Shimla, Himachal Pradesh, India. And the title of paper would be Sacrilege of Jordanian Penal Code, that is with the reading of Rana Husseini, sir.
So let us start presentations.
Am I clear to you, sir? Sorry,
Okay.
sir, I cannot hear you.
Let us start presentation. I think it is audible.
Sure, sir. You sure, sir? Thank you so much, sir. You can now go ahead, sir.
Okay, yes, start. Yes, you can start presentation.
Okay, good afternoon, sir. Sir, Dr. Anita Sharma and I are presenting this paper titled Sacrilege of Jordanian Penal Code, reading Rana Husseini. But the objective of this paper is to explore and analyze the anomalies in law that is being used by men to justify crimes against women in the name of honor. We have considered the works of Rana Husseini, Western educated Jordanian journalist and human rights activist. She has exposed honor-related crimes in Jordan. She and other crusaders have launched a campaign for stronger legal penalties against the perpetrators of honor crimes, and the present paper is based on her book Murder in the Name of Honor. The basic theme of our paper is summarized in this one slide. We have tried to cover here all that is available in the succeeding slides. In the Middle East and the South Asia, the laws that deal with honor-related violence are discriminatory towards women, and the belief system in these countries consider that honor of males is directly linked to the social norms of chastity and virginity of the females in their families and communities. So this belief favors honor killings, as these are often being treated more leniently by law than other types of murders. In some of these countries, the murder of a wife is treated more leniently than murder of a husband. There are laws that provide for reduced or even no sentence in case of honor-related crimes against women. So there is an urgent need to review the criminal codes that discriminate against women. Now, coming back to Jordan, which is the main area of Rana Husseini's work, there are certain articles in the Jordanian Penal Code which clearly discriminate against women. Foremost among these is the Article 340. The Article 340 of the Penal Code allows a reduction in the penalty when a man kills or attacks his wife or any of his female relatives in the alleged act of committing adultery or in an unlawful bed. Article 98 of the Penal Code, which deals with reduction in penalty if the perpetrator commits the crime in a state of great fury, resulting from an unlawful and dangerous act on the part of the victim. Under Article 97, when a court applies the fit of fury defense for premeditated murder, the penalty can be as little as 1 year. Courts also often reduce sentences because victims' families request leniency. This is usually the case as members of the victim's family are often complicit in honor killings. So these are the 3 articles which need an urgent review and for which Rana Hussaini and others have raised their voice. The discriminatory Jordanian laws also find mention in a report of the Law Commission of India. As per the report number 242 of the Law Commission of India, a survey by Ellen R. Shealy revealed that 20% of Jordanians interviewed simply believe that Islam condones or even supports killing in the name of family honor, which is a myth. Analogous to the articles in Jordanian Penal Code, there are articles in penal provisions of other countries also which are against the rights of women. In Iraq, punishment for murder was death sentence, but for honor killings, the laws were lenient. Similarly, in Pakistan, a study conducted on honor killings by Aurat Foundation showed that many cases of honor crimes were not reported to police. India has also not remained untouched by such honor crimes, and there have been demands by various sections of the society to have strict legal provisions to deal with such crimes. In India, there was a demand for introducing a section in Article 300 of Indian Penal Code to bring honor killings within the ambit of this article. However, the consultation paper floated by the Law Commission in its report of 2012 had viewed that there is no need for introducing a provision in Section 300 IPS in order to bring the so-called honor killings within the ambit of this provision. The existing provision in IPC are adequate enough to take care of the situations leading to the overt acts of killings. However, the National Commission of Women is of the view that the existing legal provisions in the Indian Penal Code are not enough to deal with honor-related violence. Now, if we see the difference in the penal provisions in the Middle East and that in the South Asia, an important aspect emerges. Whereas in the Middle East, the main issue involved is quantum of punishment for honor-related crimes. In the South Asia, the main problem is that the laws already in place are given scant respect by village councils. In Pakistan, the village councils, also known as jirgas, have attained notoriety by giving arbitrary and unjust decisions in favor of the strong patriarchal setup. Likewise, in India and few states, the Khap Panchayats have taken the role of courts and give judgments that aim at punishing people for marriages within the same lineage or gotra and intercaste marriages. All these so-called kangaroo courts have encouraged honor crimes in India, Pakistan, and many other countries. The root cause of the problem, as highlighted by Pakistani writer Amir Jafri, I quote, states that legitimize their own power on patriarchal structures such as extended family foster its perpetuation through legislation that subordinates women to the control of men. Examples are laws about women's dress and behavior passed in the 1980s by the Islamic State in Iran and long in existence in Saudi Arabia. The sexual conduct laws of the Zia-ul-Haq regime in Pakistan in 1980s, the sanctioning of honor killings in Jordan and elsewhere, and the restrictive laws passed by Afghanistan's Mujahideen and Taliban rulers in the 1990s. Coming back to Jordan, various women and human rights activists have launched a struggle to bring to an end the various laws that are discriminatory to women. These activists took up cudgels against the atrocities on women in the name of honor. For them, the foremost step to empower women was to rebuild those laws that encourage perpetrators to carry out honor crimes, including honor killings, and escape with minor punishment. This is in continuation to the previous slide. Stress upon the issue of abrogation of article, the Jordanian National Committee to eliminate so-called honor crimes decided to collect signatures through a nationwide campaign by making the public aware about the loopholes in the legal system, which was being used by perpetrators of honor crimes to get away with a lenient punishment. These signatures were to be presented along with the petition seeking abolition of Article 340. So the main aim of these activists was to seek abrogation of this Article 340, which they felt was strongly against the human rights of women. The main crux of the petition to abolish Article 340 has been quoted here. I'll move to the other slide. The petition launched by these activists outlined the necessity to bring about reforms in the legal system to end crimes against women. Rana's efforts prompted even the Jordan monarchy to speak up openly against atrocities on women. The monarchy has supported of equal rights to women. They have maintained that honor killings have never been a part of the Jordanian culture. In spite of the struggle launched by these activists and the support of the royal family of Jordan and that of many parliamentarians, the abrogation of Article 340 continue to face various challenges. Many people in power agree that Article 340 should be cancelled as it is discriminatory towards women, but they do not want to say it publicly out of the fear of the opposition of many of their colleagues. On the opposition of the deputies, Adnan Abu Ode, the advisor to the late King Hussein, described the lower house MPs as traditionalists who came from a pastoral culture. He told that they would never amend Article 340 because they wanted to keep the status quo. If they failed to keep the status quo, then they would be replaced by people who would. Rather, a new law known as QLA that granted women the right to file for divorce in return for monetary compensation without having to specify the reasons. Under this law, a woman had to return the dowry given to her by her husband before the wedding and waive up all of the financial obligations listed in the marriage contract. The decision was described by various women organizations as an important landmark for women empowerment. However, these few legal reforms brought by the Jordanian government that were far too late and far too less were also rescinded without proper justification in 2003. Laws like QLA and amendment in Article 340 were rejected by putting forth a simple argument that QLA was against Islam Sharia and amending Article 340 was dangerous and would be bad for the society. What was the most disappointing of all was that 2 of the 6 women who had won parliamentary seats voted against the law. 2 of the remaining 4 did not show up for the session and the remaining 2 voted in favor of amending the law. The laws which were in favor of women were not even supported by the women MPs. Now, what is important is that in the prevailing scenario where the support for abrogation of these discriminatory laws from higher authorities is scant, the silver lining is the support of the general public. The right to life is an important ingredient of the Universal Human Rights Declaration. This right is an outcome of the doctrine of natural law, which encompasses that individuals are a creation of God, who has given them the right to life and freedom to enjoy privileges without discrimination. The same is the case in honor-related crimes, where the right to life of a woman cannot be taken away from her because it has been bestowed on her by the Creator, and men in society cannot formulate their laws to deny them this right. To sum up, if some people violate the right to life and continue with the practice of honor killings, stricter laws need to be in place to punish them. The general opinion of the people is that the courts should sentence not only the actual murderer, but also the rest of the members of the family who might have cooperated in punishing the women, and head of the family who might have passed the order for the killing with heavier sentence. Honor killing is a murder and must be punished accordingly. With greater awareness, there have been many judgments by the courts in many parts of the world, have given a ray of hope to the battered women who have been at the receiving end of the barbarous practice of honor killings. Thank you so much. That's all from our side, from Dr. Neeta Sharma and I, Ritu Sharma.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was very nice presentation. Let us go to next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you,
Yes,
sir.
the next-
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Am I audible? Hello.
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
Okay, thank
Yes,
you.
ma'am, audible.
Yes, my name is Kaishinlu Kamsen. I'm a research scholar in the Department of Political Science, Manipur University. And my topic is on the traditional institutions of the Kabui Rongmei Nagas, a contemporary perspective. The Kabui Rongmei people in the Valley of Manipur are an indigenous community living in the northeastern part of India in the states of Assam, Manipur, and Nagaland. However, they are mostly concentrated in Manipur. Though they are originally from the hill districts, over the years, a large section of their population have migrated to the valley area of Manipur, and a sizable section of these people practice their indigenous religion. The Kabui people live in villages, and their villages are the basic unit of their society. The society and the social hierarchy is determined on the basis of age, sex, and marital status in the case of women. Age confers power and authority in the matters of law and governance, and also on religious matters. The predominance of elders in the administration of the village is an important feature of the Kabui society, and young men have no say on any issue concerning the village. Traditional institutions of the Kabui Rongme. Traditional institutions, locally known as Tien in the language of the people, are an important feature of the Kabui society. This is more so in the case of the section of the people practicing the indigenous religion. There are a number of traditional institutions catering to different sections of the population based on their age, sex, and marital status in the case of women. They serve as centers of propagating and preserving certain aspects of the customs and traditions of the society. Some of these institutions are the village council, the institution of the elderly women folk, institution of the married women, and the male and female dormitory. And then age, sex, and the marital status in the case of women are the determinants of membership of these institutions. The Pai or the village council, consisting of the senior-most male members, is the highest authority in the village. The members of this institution, the members of the institution of the senior-most married women helps the village priest and the other village council during rituals of birth and death. Their main role is during the festival, which formally registers the children born during the previous year as members of the village. A special ritual ceremony is performed when a woman gets admitted into this institution. Presently, however, this institution is functional only during this festival. The other institution for women is the institution of married women. This institute also functions only during the occasion of initiating newly married women into their fold, which usually falls during the festival of Kangai in some village and Ringai in some others. Additionally, they organize a kind of farewell ceremony when some of its members gets promoted to the institution of the elderly married women. Apart from these institutions, the Kengchu and Luchu, which are the male and girls dormitory, are also important institutions responsible for inculcating the traditions and customs of the people in the minds of the younger generation. All male members of the village who have attained puberty and those who have not yet been promoted to the village council are members of the male dormitory. Both bachelors and married men are members of this institution. However, unlike the male dormitory, only the unmarried single female members are members of the female dormitory. Villages with a large population usually have 2 or more dormitories. There were no separate buildings for the functioning of these institutions. These dormitories were housed in the residences of people with a big house and a high social standing in the village. Here, I will be discussing only the village council and the male dormitory in detail. The Pai or the village council. The Pai is the most important institution among the Kabui people still practicing their indigenous religion. The Pai was and is still the highest authority in these villages and is responsible for the regulation of the social religious life of the people. In the past, it also regulated the political and economic life of the people. However, presently it has now become only a social institution. The Pai consists of the senior-most male members of the village. Women are not allowed membership. Previously, women were not even allowed to participate in the discussions of the council, but this has changed gradually. Women now actively participate on issues concerning the welfare of the village, but they are still not allowed to become members. The Pai has tried to accommodate and broaden its outlook, but still have not managed to move away from its patriarchal nature. The Pai, as mentioned earlier, is the highest authority in the village and also serves as the guardian of the tradition and customary practices of the people. All important aspects of the social and religious lives of the people require the involvement of the Pai and its members. The rituals involved in the birth and death of the villagers, marriage and divorce, disputes and their settlements, etc., are all handled by the elders of the Pai. This tradition, which has been passed down from generation to generation, is still in practice among the people following their indigenous religion. Rites and rituals of passage are still an important aspect of the social religious lives of the people. The Pai also serves as the court of law. All cases of civil and criminal matters within the village are decided by the Pai. In the past, even matters of murder and theft by non-village members were also decided by the Pai. But cases of such nature are now handed over to the appropriate state mechanisms. Cases of property disputes, divorce, adoption, fights, among the villagers, etc., are all handled by them. All these cases are handled according to their appropriate customary law dealing with the issues. Since the elders of the Pai are well versed in the customary law of the people, everyone involved in the dispute abide by the decisions taken by them. The decisions of the Pai are final and binding. However, in the rare case that the parties involved are not satisfied by their decision, they have the option to go to the Zhelengrong Pai, which is the apex court of the people in contemporary times. The Zhelengrong Pai is a unit of the Zhelengrong Union, a union of all the Zhelengrong group of people consisting of the Kinpui, Kabui or the Rongmei, Liangmei, and Zeimei people. Now we come to the Kangchu or the male dormitory. The Kangchu or the male dormitory is another important social institution of the Kabui people. In the olden days, the Kangchu was a very prominent and vibrant institution. All male members who have attained puberty and who were not yet members of the village council were members of the Kangchu. However, only bachelors below a certain rank slept in the dormitory. The married members of the Kangchu slept at their respective houses. The Kangchu was housed at the residence of a prominent member of the village with a big house and a high social standing. The Kangchu is a three-tier institution consisting of bachelors, married men, and senior married men. Its members were categorized into 4 groups according to their age. Every member has to pass through these categories, gaining rank as they age. The Kangbon is among the members, and it is the highest grade in the institution, and the other members are under the control of the Kangbons. The dormitory is a social institution which plays an important role in sustaining the society, religion, and culture of the Kabui people. It was previously in the past an institution for providing the required education to lead a satisfactory life. Not only the means of survival, but also artwork like basket weaving, wood carving, carpentry, etc. were taught here. This institution was also a center of cultural activities. This institution served as a school where traditional songs and dance, stories and legends of the people, etc. were passed down from one generation to the other. The members also served as the reserve force during times of emergency, like a sudden attack from another village, attack from wild animals, or during natural calamities. Other social services like construction of paths, cleaning ponds, and helping villagers change their thatched roofs and building houses were also the duty of the young men of the Kangchu. And then, however, at present, the Kangchu as a dormitory is not functional anymore. Modern schools and colleges have taken the place of the traditional educational system. Christianity has also led to the extinction of this institution, where the entire population of the village has converted to Christianity. This institution now exists only in villages with the population still practicing their indigenous religion. Though its function as a dormitory no longer exists even in these villages, it still exists as a social institution of young men operation during festivals. It is still an important institution for the Kabui people still following their indigenous religion. It remains as an important cultural center where stories of the past are told, traditional folk and other songs are taught, and discussions on the topics of organizing the various ritual festivals are held. In addition to this, during the festivals, certain religious rituals are carried out in this institution. This association between the institutions and the religious rituals make not only the Kangchu, but also the other institutions even more socio-culturally indispensable. During these festivals, the youths of both the male dormitory and the girls' dormitory extend their help to the various tasks involved for carrying out the festival successfully. All physical work required are carried out voluntarily by them. And in conclusion, the traditional institutions are a part of the culture of the Kabui people following their indigenous religion. They have and will continue to serve as the reservoir of the traditional age-old customs and traditions. Though these institutions have lost their previous status, they are still an important feature of the social structure and the lives of the people. These institutions are important socio-cultural assets of the people, and as long as there are Kabui people following their indigenous religion, these institutions will continue to survive, albeit not to the extent of their past selves. Thank you.
So thank you very much.
Yes.
Let us move to next presentation.
Our next presentation will be presented by KM Anjana, who is also a PhD scholar from Sharda University, from School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Knowledge Park 3, Greater Noida. The title of a paper would be Cultural Alienation of Diasporic Phenomenon, a study of Amitav Ghosh's novels, which will be followed by Ma'am
Thank you so much.
Vandisha Dakhar, research scholar, Northeastern Kharmalki, Shillong, Meghalaya, India. Her title of paper would be Domestic Violence, the Present Impact of the Pandemic amid COVID-19 Situation. Over to you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Before this, I would also, yes, ma'am, I would just interrupt you. Before this, I would request the audiences, if you have questions, can you please put on in the chat box so the queries would be added to our resource person. I believe we have few questions which will be presented. So I request if any of the audiences would like to put on form more, you can always come forward. Thank you so much. Ma'am, over to you.
Yes. Good afternoon, one and all present here. I, Anjana. I'm a research scholar from Sharda University. My department is the School of Humanities and Social Sciences. Topic for my presentation is cultural alienation and diasporic phenomenon, a study of Amitav Ghosh novel. So good afternoon, everyone. I am Anjana. I'm a research scholar from Sharda University, Greater Noida. My department is the School of Humanities and Social Sciences. The topic of my presentation is cultural alienation and diasporic phenomenon, a study of Amitav Ghosh novels. So let's move forward to the abstract. So Amitav Ghosh is an extraordinary fine stylist and a narrator. Ghosh is widely read all over the world as a diasporic writer. Ghosh is an outstanding writer in the diaspora who captures all the diasporic conciseness in his novels. So I have chosen two of his novels, The Circle of Reason and The Shadow Line. Circle of Reason was his first novel that is published in 1986, and the second one is The Shadow Line that is published in 1988. So diasporic writing is primarily a reaction to lost homes and problems such as dislocation, discrimination, survival, nostalgia, cultural transition, and identification. First of all, I would talk about the Circle of Reason. The story is ultimately a serious attempt to deal with man's delusive search for reason in the background of the contemporary displacement, which has taken countless third world migrant and professionals across continent in search of better existence. So the writing of Ghosh portrays a strong sense of belongingness to a homeland. Through the depiction of the character in his novels, he has reflect or discuss the behavior, the culture, behavior, and lifestyle in his novels. So next is about the shadow lines. It establishes a new environment through home thoughts that reflect in the new identities. So shadow lines, and the shadow lines establish a new environment through whom I thought. So it is the story of a Bengali family whose present the sufferings and difficulties faced by the people during communal rights that happened in 1930 to 1934. And migrants because of the Bengal partition in India through his fictional characters. In this novel, he has interwoven and scrutinized the impacts of colonialism on the culture and society of two main neighboring cities, namely Calcutta and Dhaka. So the elements of the alienation and and diaspora, such as identity crisis and otherness, are presented in the novels. So, the segment of Al Jazeera that is present in the novel The Circle of Reason, it gives the diasporic consciousness through the character's representation. So, the main objective of this paper to analyze the notions and the feelings of the cultural alienation and the diasporic phenomenon by the analyzing, by the examining the novels, two selective novels which I have selected for this presentation. So next, move forward to the keywords. The keywords for this paper is alienation, inheritance, diaspora, homeland, and exploitation and restlessness. About the alienation it is a term restless in the sense of feeling of alienation in which a man finds himself displaced in the society. A person becomes rootless when he has no place or position in the society. He becomes a wanderer and has no place to return. Let's say about the diaspora, it is a journey towards self-realization, self-recognition, and self-knowledge and self-definition. So inheritance is a sense of nationalism, it's the ability to change the identity. Homeland, it is the concept of the place where culture, national and racial identity had formed. Means it's one's own country of birth. Exploitation means it is the act of selfishly taking advantages. Restlessness, it is inability to rest as a result of anxiety. Now next, move forward to the introduction. That as I told, Amitabh Bose is a Bengali Indian writer. He was born in Calcutta on 11th of July in 1956. So his two of the novels got the award. The Circle of Reason won Prix Medicus and took a French Literary Award in 1990. The Shadow Lines won the Sahitya Academy Award and Ananda Pushkar. So as a post-colonialist writer, Ghosh has give so elements the post-colonialist in his novels. Now about the discussion. I'm starting with the first of the novel, The Circle of Reason. It raises two sets of questions. The first concerns the relationship between Enlightenment discourse of reason and the apparatus of police in the post-colonialist context. The Circle of Reason records its protagonist Alu, whose actual name is Nachiketa Bose, from a village Lalpur to Calcutta, then to Mahi, and finally to the Middle East to an imaginary oil town, Al Jazeera. In fact, Alu's wonder crisis, the subcontinent and the Middle East is a replica of the archetypical quest for the root. It is a realistic as well as symbolic journey from darkness to light. The characters in the novel travel from one place to another for better work and for better future. The characters migrate from India to Al Jazeera for better prospects is Alu. Alu presents his dislocation from India to Al Jazeera for his better livelihood, better existence. The post-colonial phase and modern man's problems of alienation, migration, identity crisis is in life of ordinary unprivileged class of the society expressed through the fiction. The concept of rootlessness and migration are extensively described in deep sense and form a corner of human heart. The Circle of Reason is a novel of thought and reason. Inclusive three philosophical elements of Indian philosophy from where titles are. There are three reasons in the Circle of Reason: Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. One of the major concepts of Circle of Reason is continued domination and exploitation of men and women of middle class families, threatened by political and anarchical system of ruling in the time of colonial and post-colonial India. Now, in the Circle of Reason, Ghosh traces the beginning of colonial expansion to have start with cotton and silk products of nature. since cotton, silk, teak, oil, and human resources are all part of native that paved way for the institutionalization of colonial power structure. So uh, next about the shadow lines. So in the shadow lines, Ghosh point out at the textual attitude of the ruling light uh, through the Thamma's character. Thamma is the main protagonist in this novel. When Thamma prepared to visit Dhaka and bring back her old uncle Jet Moshai, she gets the revelation that Dhaka is no longer a part of India, but comes under newly formed country Bangladesh after the partition of Bengal. Thus, she is clueless of the country of which she is belonged. So here the element of the identity crisis is raised, that from which country or which identity she has now. Another incident when Thamma's son asks for details to fill in for fill details in aeroplane's ticket, she is bewildered. So it was difficult for her to fill the form. The place of birth is Dhaka and the nationality is Indian. So here arises the question of identity crisis. So Shadowlines addresses the problems and consequences of a decolonized nation and brings into surface the political and cultural difficulties that any decolonized nation normally faces. Problems as identity crisis, separations, resistance, gender, and exploitation are mainly highlighted and dealt with in this novel. In this novel, he has interwoven and scrutinized the impact of colonization on the culture and society of two main neighboring cities, Calcutta and Dhaka. Okay, so we are moving ahead. The nationalism and national identity presented in this novel. Ghosh has done mostly centering on the cultural changes, social issues, and the idea of nationalism. As he grew up in three countries, India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, so he personally has the experience of migration, the cultural differences, identity crisis. So the novel was set in the milieu of historical events like the Swadeshi movement, World War II, partition of India, and communal rights of 1963 to 64, and Dhaka and Calcutta. Now about the conclusion. As Ghosh is a prominent writer, Bengali writer, okay, Brinda Bose has said uh, about Ghosh's writing that it is no doubt fitting that in the age of the extra normally embarrassing of globalization, we may claim to have closed the gap between the other and is straddling it. Certainly, the legacy of post-colonial adjust today appears to have settled into potentially numbing acceptance of multicultural European. In such a circumstances, the diasporic imagination of Amitav Ghosh that restless with an understanding of bicultural as it yokes by violence together, discrete and distant identities as essential to our understanding of our history even as it is being created. So I have given there as Bhava stated that in his research that Thamma, Ila, and May Price are woven into the fabric of the novel by common thread of postmodern tiredness. So Ghosh claimed that hybrid and mixed nature of civilization may also be expressed through language. Here, language played a most important part in the novels as presented by the Ghosh. The literature has thus become means the literature of the diaspora served as a bridge between the two distinct culture, home memories, and the experience of the immigrants and their native community in the host country. So the literature has thus become an extended form of return home. Many of the as goes his strategy toward the migration movement was unique in all his work. He noticed experimental lives and gave an optimistic touch. His novels are still on the top of for the root cause of migration that can never be heard. The novels, of course, deal with the subjects of political and hardship and histories that the diaspora caused, homeland memories, and transculturalism. An individual is expressed as diaspora consciousness, experience, and thoughts as diasporic. Nearly all the original issues and problems for diasporic populations. Next, I'm moving to my references. I have taken the references from the general India writing in English, a subaltern perspective. Author is Annapurna K. and Satyapriya R. The research scholar, literature of diaspora. The topic is literature of diaspora, Amitabh Ghosh selected novels. It is from languageinindia.com. The second one is Bharati K. Theme of alienation in Amitabh Ghosh novel, The Shadow Lines. Journal is International Journal of Research and Analytical Review. Number third is K. Rathika. Journal is International Journal of English Language, Literature and Humanities. And the topic of the paper is Displacement of Women and Sense of Exile in Amitabh Ghosh, The Circle of Reason. Number 4 is Dr. Anbarasi V. The topic of his paper is Cultural Poetics in the Shadow Lines, International Journal of Scientific and Engineering Research. Number next is Dr. Sweta Saxena. Her topic for the paper is Travails of Cultural Translation and Fragmented Identities, and the study of Amitabh Ghosh, The Shadow Lines. The journal is the Criterion and International Journal of English. The next is Amitabh Ghosh, Circle of Reason. I have taken the reference from the internet, the goodread.com. The Shadow Lines also from the goodread.com. And the next is Kambiya, Social Setting in the Novels of Amitabh Ghosh. This is the topic of his paper. Generally, Journal of Research Scholar and Professionals of English Language Teaching. The last one is Mukherjee Dipanjoy. Topic for this paper is Treatment of Diaspora and Amitabh Ghosh Fiction, a reading of his selected novels, and journal is International Journal of English Language, Literature and Translation. So, thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, everyone, for giving me this opportunity to present my paper. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, madam, for your well presentations. We can present, we can go to next presentations.
Now we let the research scholar of Northeastern Hill University from Meghalaya, India, to take away the next session for the presentation. Ma'am Wandri, are you here, ma'am?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you. Over to you, ma'am.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. And I would like to thank first all the organizers who have organized this wonderful conference and who has given us the platform and the opportunity to give our papers. And here, my paper will be Domestic Violence, the Present Impact of the Pandemic amid COVID-19 situation. Here, when you talk about domestic violence, it is against women. Domestic violence against women is highly prevalent worldwide, whether it is in the developed countries or under the developed countries. Violence against women remain a global issue, you can say, all over the world, and it needs to be addressed, and appropriate steps by the authorities and legislative bodies needs to be taken. Here, violence against women can result in many serious injuries, such as physical, mental, when you talk about sexual, and then when you talk about economic and reproductive health problems also, right? So here, intimate, partner violence is the most common form of violence, and 1 in 3 women worldwide have experienced physical or sexual violence by the perpetrators in their lifetime. And I would like to discuss a few of the, legal provisions, when you talk about laws, all right, legal provisions and international instruments which are being, given, for the a person who are being abused, all right, of this violence. So here, when you talk about the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005, this particular act has contained several features, all right, which is comprehensive enactment, all right, and the expression of domestic violence also has been defined thoroughly. And then a right of women, to secure housing, and then a combination, there is combination of civil and criminal remedies, and then the, magistrate can also pass orders when you talk about protection orders, and when you talk about appointment of protection officers, all right. And then there's another act also, Dowry Prohibition Act, all right. So here the main act of the main aim of this act is to secure women from social evil acts and provides penalty for illegal transaction of dowry. All right. Through this act, taking or giving of dowry is a serious criminal offense, and hence it prohibits demand for dowry. All right. So this law is made for Indian women to give protection against domestic violence due to, dowry demand. So when you talk about, Indian Penal Code, all right, there are certain provisions there also. When you talk about Section 498, Clause A, capital A, where whoever being the husband or the relative of a husband of a woman subjects such woman to cruelty shall be punished with imprisonment for a term which may extend to 3 years, and shall also be liable to fine. You see, this particular section was introduced in the year 1983 for the protection of, married women from being subjected to cruelty, which includes, inflicting, mental or when you talk about physical harm to the body or health of the woman, and indulging in acts of harassment with a view to coerce her or her relations to meet any unlawful demand for any property or valuable security by the husband or his relatives. See, this particular section was introduced with the main purpose to combat the menace of, dowry death and harassment to a woman at the hands of a husband or his relatives. And then when you talk about here, Section 304, so dash capital B, where the death of a woman is caused by any burns or bodily injury or, otherwise other than, under normal circumstances within 7 years of her marriage. And it is shown that soon before her death, she was subjected to cruelty or harassment by a husband or any relative of a husband in connection with any demand for dowry. Such death shall be, called, a dowry death. All right. And then when you talk about, those are some of the, when you talk about legal provisions, and when you talk about the international instruments, all right, you have the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, 1948. All right, and Article 7, which states that all are equal before the law, all right, and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protections of laws. And then we have Article 12, which provides everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth, without discrimination of race, color, sex, language, religion, political, And then there is Commission on the Status of Women, Economic and Social Council in, in the year 1946. All right. So the main functions of this particular commission also is that this is the first function of the commission is to prepare, report, and make recommendations when it relates to measures in promotion of the rights of women in various disciplines, such as social, and then educational, and then when we talk about civil, economic, and politics. The second is the recommendation on the circumstances, all right, in the field of women's rights, which are urgent, by nature. And then when you talk about international conferences also, the important international conferences, they are the Vienna Conference, all right. So from the very beginning, the Commission on the Status of Women has made, substantial contribution in the fields of women's rights. The first World Conference was held in Mexico in 1975, when they talk about equality, peace, and development. And then the second World Conference was held in Copenhagen in 1980. And then when it deals with education, employment, and health. And then the third World Conference was held in Nairobi to review and evaluate, the achievements so far. All right. So we come to the Beijing conference. All right. So the Fourth World Conference on Women was held in Beijing. The conference indicated a remarkable turning point, which is global, a global agenda on women empowerment and for gender equality. So here it sets here the strategic objectives, all right, and actions for the advancement of women and the achievement of gender equality, all right, in 12 critical areas, all right, which concerns the women and poverty, education and training of women, and then women and health, and then violence against women, violence and armed conflict, women and the economy, and then women in power and decision making, institutional mechanism for the advancement of women, and then human rights of women, and then women and media, women and environment, and the girl child, right? And here, when you talk about, there's another declaration and elimination of discrimination against women in the year 1965. Here also, the declaration had started, that in spite of the presence of various conventions for protecting the rights of women, the discrimination against women still exists. All right. However, the declaration had guaranteed to eradicate the discrimination against women in any form, especially to, ensure equality of rights of women. All right. So when you talk about Article 10 also, they've given, there are the right to equal pay for both men and women, and the right to equal treatment with regards to the work of, the same kind, and then the right to receive family allowance equal to that of men, and then the right to, without discrimination on the basis of grounds to receive vocational training to work, and then right to free choice of profession. And then there are many conferences, conventions, and declarations. And when you talk about convention on all forms of discrimination against women in 1983, right, in 1993, and then those are the main conferences that needs to be that I have added. And here, when you talk about equal remuneration convention also, and then convention against discrimination of women. So here, when you talk about, those are some of the provisions, legal provisions. And then I've also, in my paper, I've also, the main thing is the impact of the, the domestic, the impact of the pandemic. All right. When you talk about cases of domestic violence have risen. All right. So the present situation of the pandemic for the past 1 year has raised various concerns for the general public. And regarding economic uncertainties, there is, anxiety, especially when relations of the pandemic had fueled by mandatory stay-at-home and lockdown. All right. And however, apart from this, more concern is seen in the family front, whereby domestic violence has increased globally across the globe. Countries like India, then United States, then United Kingdom, then Argentina, China, Brazil, France, to name a few. All right, Singapore, Australia, and others have reported, cases of the rise of domestic violence and intimate partner violence. So here there is an awareness campaign in the midst of all this pandemic, whereby, in the shadow pandemic public awareness campaign, which was being held, there is the executive director of the UN, all right, UN woman, Plumzile Lambo Nuka, all right. He rightly said that even before the pandemic, violence against women was one of the most widespread violations of human rights, all right. So since lockdown restrictions, domestic violence has multiplied. All right, it has multiplied, and it had, it has spreading across the world in a, you can say it is a shadow pandemic. All right, it cannot be seen. All right, so this is it is within the four walls. All right, within the four walls of the house. So this is a critical time for action from prioritizing special services like shelter and support for women survivors, to providing, the economic support and stimulus packages needed for broader recovery. All right. So through this campaign, the UN activists and advocates like Kate Winslet also, she's an actor, to help the spread, all right, of this issue. all right, so that it can comes fully to light. All right, so there is this I have also mentioned in my paper a few of the statistics. All right, so there is a spike of cases, and emergency calls have increased during the lockdown. So here it is pertinent to mention that even in India, after the world nationwide lockdown since last year, rampant complaints were made. All right, as stated by the National Commission for Women's, whereby the state of Tamil Nadu reported an increase, in such cases, and then they received 25 calls every day, all right, during the lockdown period, and registered at least 40 such cases, all right, per day. They received 25 cases. And here, similarly, in Bangalore police also, they have reported a spike in complaints from 10 calls to 25 calls every day, every single day, from the victims of domestic violence. So here, as per a court, it has mentioned that in 2020, between March 25th and May 31st, 1,477 complaints of domestic violence were made by women in India. All right, so here, just within that particular time frame, those particular months, just between those few months, March till May, so it has increased drastically. So here, the National Commission of Women received an increase for at least 2.3 times in domestic violence complaints. And in September, the government told the parliament that legal assistance through the National Legal Services Authority was provided in a total of 2,878 cases during the lockdown period, of April to June. All right, so the cases rose sharply from 2,960 in 2019 to, when you talk about 5,297 in 2020 and 1,463 from January this year, 2021 to March 25th, 2021. All right, so emergency calls also have, when you talk about other countries also, all right, we have I have just given you a brief data of in India, whereas in other countries also abroad, emergency calls have increased tremendously. In Argentina by 25%. Helpline calls in Singapore and Cyprus have increased and registered more than 30%, then 40 to 50% in Brazil, then 60% in the European Union, and 100% in India. All right, those were the data. So here in the United States too, the National Domestic Violence Hotline have increased, whereby victims, try to reach out and communicate through text and phone calls. All right. So here, when you talk about, even I have attended one program online, which is Violence Against Women. It was organized, it was being held by the news channel T7, and one of the legislators have spoken that, the Srimati Ampreen Lingdor, she had spoken that in her constituency also, there was tremendous rise of, domestic violence, and they have come to her also for help. All right, they have come and give their complaints to her also. So you can see that even the legislators also have seen and have spoken out how domestic violence have increased. All right, they also have witnessed that, all right, during this pandemic. And one of the NGO, also grassroots NGO that I had interviewed, she said that yes, I mean, like high profile people, when you talk about domestic violence, they won't come forward. It's unreported most of the time. All right, mostly from the BPL, all right, below poverty line, they usually come and report cases, all right, where they want to seek help. All right, mostly when you talk about maintenance, all right, mostly when you talk about money, all right, the husband deprived them of money, all right, of these such violence. And then here, when you talk about violence against women over the years, they have a direct link and tend to increase during emergencies such as epidemic, and pandemic and epidemic. All right, women who are displaced, refugees, and living in conflict affected areas are particularly vulnerable and had to succumb to such kind of violence. So this may occur due to many reasons, such as disruption of social and protective networks, stress, high population density, poor water, sanitation and hygiene, close proximity in living conditions, limited access to services, services increase the risk of violence against women. And then during the pandemic, the prospect that women living in an abusive relationship and their children exposing to such violence has increased drastically. Because as family members spend more time at home, all right, you have to remember that, because within close contact with the family, and the woman had to deal with, uh, you know, uh, keeping in mind that they have additional stress, all right, economic insecurity, financial instability, and job losses. Moreover, with the present situation, the women have less contact with her family and friends, and in the meantime, they lack moral support, all right, and protection against the abusers. And then women bear the brunt of increased workload during the pandemic, whereby school closures, all right, further worsen this burden and places more stress on them. All right. So here, the disturbance of livelihood and the ability to earn a living, especially during this pandemic, has created a lot of problem. All right, including for women, eventually decrease access to basic necessities and services, which further increase stress on the risk of economic abuse. All right, so the abuser perpetrators may use restrictions, all right, due to the pandemic, to exercise control and power over their partners by depriving them any health services, psychosocial support from both formal and informal networks. All right, so during the lockdown period, people are confined in their homes, like I've mentioned, with the intention to protect the public and prevent widespread infection. But instead, here, when you talk about the victims here, they were trapped with their abusers. All right, some activists as well as the National Commission of Women reported an increase, all right, in the pandemic. All right, and here a nationwide WhatsApp number also was been launched by the National Commission of Women to provide an alternative method, for women to report domestic violence. And here it is pertinent to mention that healthcare facilities also play an important role during these crises. And then healthcare facilities should update the referral pathways of services available locally to include information on psychosocial support and counseling services, and then protection services, hotlines, and shelters. All right. So, they have to increase more of that. These hotline, so that victims, if they cannot go and approach because of the pandemic, then at least they can, give at least just a call, all right, or they can email. So another bigger obstacle which arises during the pandemic is that, um, is that such services, all right, suppose, when you talk about crisis centers and then legal aids and then protection services, hotlines have scaled back, reducing access of sources which are helpful for women who are in abusive relationship. Apart from this, problem is unavailability, all right, to the formal support system which arose, whereby the machinery under the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005 had been acknowledged as an essential service during the lockdown. Therefore, the protection officers face a lot of problem also when it comes to this, when it deals with, visiting households of the victim. They cannot go and visit, all right, and because of the pandemic. Moreover, the NGOs were unable to have physical communication. Now, because of the pandemic, we have to maintain that, social distance, all right, with the victim and the police officer being as frontliners were overburdened also when such cases arises, with an effort to tackle COVID-19, and eventually cannot effectively help the victims. All right, so I shall conclude that after considering all the obstacles and hindrances of of the present pandemic, it is necessary to highlight the fact that henceforth, all right, henceforth, protection should be easily accessible to the victim, and the people who exercise such abuse, all right, should, who have, experience, I mean, such abuse, should continue to, obtain access to support and then medical care, refuge, all right, if in future another public health disaster hits. Thank you.
Hello. Hello. Hello, I am. Hello.
Yes, may I know who is this speaking?
Can I present my paper? Shall I present
Hello.
my paper?
May I know who
Hello.
is speaking?
Shall
I
I
think
present my
time is
paper?
excess. I think time is excess.
Accountability
So
and
is
standard
there,
issues.
Right, sir.
yeah, is there any presentations?
Hello. Hello.
Any presentations?
Not
Hello. Sir, I am
not
Bharti.
anymore, sir.
I am Bharti.
No presentations.
I am Bharti.
If you could kindly, we are already exceeding with the time, ma'am. If you could
I am Bharti.
continue your session in the next technical session. As of now, we have already crossed the time limit, ma'am. Is that
So
clear
what
to you,
we
ma'am?
do now? So what we do now?
Please wind up the session.
We can
Wind
either
up.
wind up the speaker if you wish to.
Okay,
Yes,
okay,
sir.
okay. Thank you. Let me make a comment. It was three papers were well studied and well researched papers actually. And the three papers were actually deals with the present contemporary scenario. It's about the miserable predicament of women that facing in India now. It was well prepared. First of all, it is on penal or law point of view. It was presented very well presentation. And those other paper was Amitav Ghosh. It was again about cultural and the concept of nationalism. It was also well studied, even though the concept of nationalism is well discussed now. So all the papers were well studied, and I appreciate the organizers, especially the president of COP Permanent Trust, Dr. Regine Silvest, and all the presenters, all the coordinators. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone, for the beautiful session. I'd like to thank the resource person and so as the presenters who have really taken the initiative to make us understand better on what are the important agendas for us to understand in this particular generation.